A major policy reform being approved by the Union Cabinet moments ago. The Cabinet has approved a Railway Development Authority, essentially a body that is going to set tariffs. And who better than Professor Bibek Devroy, one of the original architects and one of the biggest proponents of that. Thank you very, very much, Professor Devroy, for joining us. My first question really has to be, if for the benefit of our viewers, you can help make us understand how exactly will this Rail Development Authority work in terms of fixing tariffs, because tariffs always have been such a huge political hot potato in India, rail tariffs.
Well, firstly, it's not purely tariffs. Let me clarify that, because essentially what happens is, in what we recommended, and I need to clarify this, is that the Ministry of Railways sets the policy which sets out the principles for competition. And to ensure that the rules of competition are followed, you have this development authority, which has tariffs, but it goes beyond tariffs, because it also ensures that there is a level playing field between the private player and the public sector provider, which is Indian Railways. And in addition, as you said rightly, you have tariffs both on the passenger side and on the freight side. This, of course, is recommendatory in nature. So it's up to the ministry and the government to decide whether they accept it or not. However, the fact that this is an independent body insulates it from the kind of political pressures that you are mentioning.
I'm glad you say that, because I think for long the railways have been marred with this kind of a political pressure. I mean, for the longest, railway ministers came from just one state in India. But help us understand, how exactly will this ensure a level playing field for both public and private, and also will perhaps ring fence the private investment in Indian railways?
Yes, but let's not jump the gun too much. I should mention that this was first mentioned in the Dinesh Trivedi railway budget speech, when it was mentioned as a rail tariff authority. It's gone a bit beyond tariffs. Let me give you an example. Just for argument's sake, don't think of it only in terms of what's going to happen this year, but suppose in future, not right now, in future, the private sector wants to run a train from, let us say, Delhi to Mumbai. Eventually, it should be able to do that, but then the private sector needs access to the track. It needs a path from Delhi to Mumbai. Now, it's perfectly possible that in granting that path, the private sector is discriminated against. This is what I meant by fair rules of competition. So that is also important. Also important is something that I forgot to mention earlier, that the social costs legitimately should be borne by the government, because the railways have a social obligation to function or to perform over and above the commercial bit. Who calculates that social cost? What we had recommended, I've not seen what the cabinet has approved, but what we had recommended is that this development authority also objectively computes the social cost in consultation with a body like the CAG, so that we unambiguously know what the social costs are.
All right, that's a fair point indeed, because if there are social costs, then the railway alone, at least the government alone, should bear the burden of that. But, you know, sir, private sector has so far been encouraged to invest in infrastructure, in station development and all of that. Do you believe this particular move is going to woo the private sector? Is this perhaps the beginning of at least private passenger trains being run in this country?
Look, Supriya, let me sort of factually state that even today, the private sector, as per the policy, is allowed to run both freight and passenger trains as per the policy. It's a different matter that they will not run that, because they will not get that part. Until we spend on capacity, we will not have those parts. Today, most of the corridors, particularly the corridors connecting the metros, are stretched beyond capacity. So if one is expecting the private sector to run a train from Howrah to Mumbai, that's not going to happen. If someone wanted a path from Jaisalmer to Jodhpur, that's available. But why should the private sector go there? So the private sector involvement in running trains is a long shot. What I personally think can happen, and I'm sort of sticking my neck out, is that let's say there will be a Rajdhani. Out of that Rajdhani perhaps has 20 coaches. 18 of those coaches will be run by Indian Rail, and 2 of those coaches may very well be run by the private sector.
That's an important clarification that you're making, and I think it's also an important insight into how this will perhaps begin. So say 20 coaches, 18 of them by Indian Railways and 2 by the private sector. But you know, the cabinet note that has been put out in the public domain also says that this Railway Development Authority is also going to set efficiency and performance standards. What sort of performance standards are we talking about? Are we talking about operating standards for just trains? Are we talking about other operational parameters of Indian Railways? What exactly is this in reference to? Because I know this was a part of your recommendation as well.
Well, look, in several areas we have the concept of social obligations, social sector obligations. Now, the private sector is not necessarily going to run a train in the northeast. A train in the northeast needs to be run. By the same token, if the private sector comes in and is allowed to run trains, it may very well be told, I'm just using this as an artificial example of what might happen, it might very well be told that you are not going to concentrate only on the lucrative lines, but you also have to run this particular line in the northeast. That's the kind of thing one had in mind when we made those recommendations.
So largely on lines with what happens in telecom, that there are obligations to roll out in the rural areas so that you connect the hinterland as well. Was that the idea behind it, sir?
Sorry, the idea behind that is that you are going to argue for a level playing field. Now, the level playing field must be level between the public sector provider and the private sector. You cannot have a situation where the private sector is given all the lucrative points and the public sector is burdened with the unremunerative lines. That's not fair either. So hence you must have a level playing field between the two.
That's a valid point indeed.
Hello.
That's a valid point indeed. I'm going to take a quick last question before I let you go, because I know you're on the road yourself, but I'll take a quick last question. When and how long will it take for India to get out of the socialist mindsets as far as that railway tariff is concerned? Because tariff adjustment is going to be one of the functions of this authority. I know it will be recommendatory in nature, but because this is going to be an independent authority, perhaps there will be some semblance. Because if you see the passenger traffic in the last few months, if not a year, the growth in airline traffic has been more in the growth than the growth in the second AC or the first AC categories, and which is why I'm asking you, what will it, how long will it take for India to move to a market determined rate of travel for railways?
Really asking me to stick my neck out. You see, look, this is incremental. We're gradually going to have the bits in place.
That's the idea.
Firstly, the railway budget as presented in Parliament has gone. Now we're going to have that. Now you must remember that before one decides what is the market rate, so far as the public sector provider is concerned, you need a transition to commercial accounting. That commercial accounting has already begun to happen. It will be 2019 before it filters through the entire Indian railway system. So my gut reaction to the question you asked is this, based on the recommendations of this authority, you might have increases in fares on the passenger side. But if you are asking the question that when will those become a bit more objective, a bit more market determined, I would say that we are looking beyond 2019.
We are looking beyond 2019 because it is also a hugely politically sensitive issue. But thank you very, very much, one of the architects of those recommendations. Yes, the idea was mooted first by Dinesh Trivedi, but it was you and your recommendation that took it forward from just tariff management. Thank you very, very much indeed, Professor Bibek Devroy, for joining us right here on ET Now on this big reform for India.